I just want to tell you guys, I am so proud of these guys. I'm going to get choked up because this week was unbelievable. And I'm telling you what, we have some warriors in this generation right here among us. Just to give you just a quick little background, before we left on our trip, part of our preparation was meeting Sunday mornings, I forget how many weeks, 8 weeks before we actually left, and each one of them were asked to prepare a devotional, and it was just stellar, watching them just share the Word of God with each other on the team, diving in, praying together for our trip, for all, just collecting hygiene kits and other stuff we were taking with us to minister in the community, and Tanner, he didn't have, as much on his plate as some of us did, and so he organized this whole trip. Cindy and I didn't. He organized this whole trip for us and helped us every step of the way. Becky and her organizing skills helped pull stuff together as well, and Tanner got us through just craziness in the airports and just really held our team together, and we just have some great leaders here that just took amazing risks. And part of the crazy stuff was, and I'm going to let them share here, is this is all just as we're preparing. Part of the template that we were given, we were reading through this stuff from Sharing the Vision, and they said typically when a team comes, they've got certain skills that they bring. So they may have a work crew that's going down there to do work on the property and helping building and whatnot, or they'll have a sports team that's coming to do sports with different kids in the community, or another team that's got a set, of skills. They'll come and do some worship and stuff. Or a children's ministry team that's coming to do VBS. So think about what skill sets you're bringing. And we kind of all looked at each other. It's like, well, we're kind of the land of misfit toys here. And, we all have different things. And honestly, we were just praying, God, just show us as we're planning out the time we were going to be there. And I'm telling you, the way that God used us, we would have never, ever fathomed in each of our just unique things that we each bring to the table. And it was just an incredible journey and an encounter with God that each one of these guys had. And so I'm going to pass the mic. I'm going to let these guys share. Which one of you guys want to go first? Check. Go ahead. Let's go down the line. Go ahead, Tara.
I didn't really expect to go first, but let's do it. I'm Tara Pennycuff. So coming into this trip, I was open to anything, like learning what God had to show me. I was just open and ready to be taught. So I'm going to read a passage from Hebrews 11, starting in verse 4. It says, "By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he being dead still speaks." I'll just read that a little bit. But through that passage, it keeps saying, by faith, this person was able to do this. This person was able to do this. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear. So by faith, people were able to do things. Sounds like I'm shaking, sorry. But through this, God just taught me to trust him more fully. There was one point in the trip, Sydney came up to me and she's like, "Hey, do you want to lead children's church?" And I was like, "Sure, why not?" Thinking it'd be 5 kids. We get there, and they're like, "Hey, there's going to be 25 kids this service." And it's like, okay. I was not prepared for 25 kids. I'm not the most responsible, so giving me 25 kids it can just go
Now
anywhere.
you tell us.
But through that, I had a little panic moment. I was like, I can't teach 25 kids about God and all he's done. There's a whole book about him, but I can't do that. But in that moment, I knew God's going to use me to send his message. I just have to be there, be present, let him work through me. So in this passage, I thought, what would happen if I replaced my name? So by faith, Tara was able to do this through God because she trusted him fully. So that's what I learned on the trip. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Becky Page. one of the things that I really wanted to learn on the trip is just how to trust God fully. And as you heard, I'm good at organizing, but that always becomes my weakness because I love to control everything. So he definitely showed us that. We got thrown a lot of stuff from our bus going through craters in the road to trucks breaking down. And Teresa and Jim were just amazing people to learn that by. They literally dropped their whole lives and moved to a foreign country to do what God told them to do. And I feel like I learned a lot from Teresa and how to calm down and just let God move through me.
I'm Tanner Atkins. I'm related to this goon over here and his wife. This was just an incredible trip, and I try not to call it an experience. This just kind of the intern down there kind of reminded us of this. Like an experience fades, but an encounter with God is a fire that burns your whole life. And that's just one thing I've just been trying to say is this hasn't been an experience. This has been an encounter with the living God. And I have a passage that I kind of would like to relate. Hold half my stuff. Out of 2 Corinthians chapter 5, starting in verse 18. And this is Paul's charge to us as ambassadors for Christ. Starting in verse 18, it says, "All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself." All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciled the world to himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. Take the top one. But just, I think that's kind of like my takeaway from the trip is like we are as followers of Christ, we are ambassadors of Christ. And there was some conversation, I can't remember how it came up down there, but we were talking about like the intern down there was like, do you call yourself a missionary? And she's like, yeah, I introduced myself as a missionary. And we were like, oh, that's cool. And she's like, no, well, as followers of Christ, you're all missionaries. Whether you're in a foreign field or not, we're all missionaries. We're all called to reconcile people to Christ, to go after people's hearts. And I just kind of was like, wow, that's you're right. Like, and like that's one thing I'm going to try to do from now on is like that is introducing myself. I'm a missionary that happens to do some engineering work on the side, because that's really our first and foremost call. And another thing is I think just God is teaching me to listen. Because if we're not connected to God, I mean, this brings a whole new meaning to like I'm the vine, you are the branches, where Jesus is the vine, we are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And just for us to be able to do work for Christ, we have to be connected to Him and in community with Him. We have to be able to hear from Him. And that involves just like spending time with him and reading the word that he's given us, and being and just kind of setting aside the things of the world to listen to God, and allow His Spirit to work in us and through us. Because like all the stuff we did, all the impactful things we did down there was, it was ultimately through God's Spirit working in us and through us. We had an encounter on. We did street evangelism on the Friday night we were down there, where we just we all met up at the church and prayed together. We split into 2 groups, and we just went out on the streets in what they called a barrio, which is kind of a slum in the Dominican Republic, and we just went and talked to families, and we'd just walk up to people on the streets and just start sharing the gospel with them, and we would just allow the Spirit of God to just guide us to the people that need it. And there was the last group we talked to. There was just some girl standing over on the fence in front of her house, and I just felt prompted to go and talk to her. And I know a little bit of Spanish, but it's rough, and I just tried to go and start a conversation with her in Spanish because our interpreter was busy with someone else, and all the rest of the group came over, and Jim shared the bridge with her. Her mom came out, and she got to be a part of it as well, and her mom actually gave her life to Christ that night. And it was all because just following the prompting of the Spirit, and we can't take any credit for any of that. It's we're the vessels, but it's God that's doing the work through us. And yeah, I just want to say that we are called to something so much greater than ourselves. I think here in America in particular, it's especially easy to get caught up in just the artificial, like just the day-to-day, easy to get caught up in the things we do for a living. We need to do that kind of stuff, but I think it's easy to get caught up in it. And we are just called to something so much greater and more grand. We're called to go after people's hearts, and personally, I just feel like what was spoken to me was just I feel like I'm just called to minister to the men of this country. I think we're just we just got done with our Gideon series, and I think this country is just in a huge poverty of male leadership, male spiritual leaders, and I just feel like that's been kind of put on my heart just to train up godly men to lead in this country. If they're they definitely need ministry down in the Dominican, but tell you what, this country is in desperate need of godly people, and I just want to charge this church to just to rise up to the occasion and just go after the hearts of this country.
My name is Zach Gertner, and I think one of the things going into this trip that this is something that I probably wouldn't have done. When Jim and Teresa came to Jim's house that Thursday night and they mentioned a missions trip, I was like, no, I don't really want to go. And then I remember Teresa turning to me and asking me, she said, so you think you're going? I was like, I'll probably pray about it and I'll think about it, fully thinking, no, I don't want to go. And then I remember Jim White opened up his Bible and turned to the end of Mark, and he said, now all those who call themselves Christ followers should go and preach the gospel. And I was like, Well, looks like I'm going. If you met this man, you couldn't tell him no. No, but it made me think of 1 John chapter 2, verse 6, and it says, those who say they live in God should live just as Jesus did. And it kind of made me reflect on my life a little bit, that I'm what Jim calls a nominal Christian for a while. I was taking the title, but I wasn't really living the life. And in the months preparing up to the trip, I was just in my devotionals, I was asking God to use me in ways that I couldn't see to prepare me spiritually. And when we came to the end of the trip, I was just talking to him in a morning devotional, and I said, you brought me on this trip, but what's next? And about an hour later, we were coming home from the second VBS, and Teresa got a phone call because Cindy left her wallet up on the North Coast. And so both Jims went up to the North Coast to get it, and we got a phone call about an hour later after I did my devotional that the truck broke down and that I was speaking that night at the church. Me and Austin both were. And I had about 3 hours to prepare a sermon. So God definitely, I struggled to trust in God and obeying, and he definitely through that, I had to step out in faith, and I had to do it. I just lost every word I was trying to say. No, but the whole time, like the few times I stepped out of my comfort zone the entire time I was there, I felt nothing but peace the entire time. So I knew the Holy Spirit was in me and working. So that was really cool.
Hello, my name is Austin Atkins. Tanner's brother, Jim's nephew. And I just want to thank you guys as a church for supporting this. We couldn't have gone without you guys, and it's just good to have people backing us up and praying for us. And I think that's one of the reasons that we were successful with this trip, and that people gave their lives to Christ and people grew. So I'd like to thank you guys for that. I don't think I can share everything from the trip, obviously, in 5 minutes, so I'm going to share what I thought was most important, and that's the comfort zone. When I went on the trip, I kind of was secretly hoping that everything would be like things that I was good at. Like I just wanted to work with my hands and do good things, but I didn't want to step out too far from my comfort zone. I wanted to paint and dig and plant a garden and then leave. Because that's what I'm good at, and that's what I'm comfortable with. So it was that way for about 3 days, and I got comfortable with that. We were working, and then we did the street evangelism. I don't think Tanner did justice to what this kind of street evangelism was when he was talking about it. This is like ghettos of the Dominican Republic at 10 to midnight with everyone out on it was a Friday, so they're off work and they're just chilling. I mean, there's people doing drugs out here, and it's just the streets. So it was wild. So when we split into groups, Jim White was in my group, and he kind of led our missions, and that's it. The whole night he did what he was going to do, and some people stepped out in their faith and talked to him, but I just sat there and did nothing and watched. And it was a good experience, but I didn't grow that day. And when we got back, I saw that some of these guys had stepped out of their comfort zone and talked to people, and I knew that was something I was going to have to do later in the trip. So with that in mind, the rest of the trip, I kind of stepped out of my comfort zone to talk to people in Spanish, even though I'm bad at Spanish. I did skits, even though I hate acting and I'm bad at it. I spent time with kids, even though I don't really like kids. But the whole trip, I kind of had the final gauntlet at the end. Jim had been pushing me the whole time to preach, and I kind of said no. But finally, at the end, I think God had been telling me that I was going to have to do it anyways. You can't avoid God's plan every time. And the truck broke down, and they said we're going to have to preach. And at that point, it was like God had beat me down enough that I was ready to step out of my comfort zone and get it done. So I think the best way, what I've learned from this, the best way to grow is spiritually and as a person is to put yourself in a situation or involve yourself in something that is going to force you to be uncomfortable. Whether that be joining a life group for the first time, talking to someone in your family about Jesus, even though you know they're going to laugh at you and make fun of you. Anything. Get involved in mission with yourself. I mean, the Bible is full of stories about people who are called to be uncomfortable. We had Moses stood before the Pharaoh and told him he was wrong. We had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood before the king, told him he was wrong. We had Paul that preached the very thing that he was killing people for preaching. We had David who killed the Goliath, and we had Jesus stepped out of heaven, out of his comfort zone, to be on earth, sacrifice for the people. So I want to call you guys, do something that makes you uncomfortable, get up on the stage and preach or something. I don't know, join a life group. I just want to challenge you to just try to grow as a person. Every time you do something that makes you uncomfortable for God, when you're done, you'll feel a peace, and you'll just be ready to do it again.
Hello, I'm Courtney Hutzler, and throughout this trip, I think it was important for me to learn that God is the same wherever you go, whether you're here or at a Haitian church in the Dominican Republic. He's always with you, and I think that's something that we all say a lot, but we don't really think about it, and we don't really understand that He is always with you, protecting you in the highs and the lows and the frustrating times. I think it's hard to sometimes stop and pray and spend time with Him, even when, or especially when you're having rough times or you're not sure what's going on or what you're doing. And I think that I learned that a lot, because especially the first couple days, we had some problems with gardening and stuff like that. And the girls, we struggled a little bit because we had no idea what we were doing. And so I think even in those times, I knew that God was with us. He was watching over us, even though we didn't know what was going on. And there were some moments where I was unsure and a little scared. And I knew that He was with me, protecting me through all of it. And I think that's what just got me through a lot of things, especially like the waterfalls, because I think everyone here knew that I was pretty scared for that. And it was all okay. I knew that He was with me, even though I was scared. And I think I said this one of our last days there, but even if you don't have very much, you always have God with you. So.
My name is Daniel Swim. I guess I get the honor of bringing up the rear. It's so challenging to try to pick out just a few things from this trip to talk about, because I feel like I could do a whole sermon series on just everything that God used us for. And just, Tanner talked about, people coming to Christ, and just to give you guys an idea of just how amazing God worked. I was trying to keep track of how many people we were praying for and that accepted Christ, and you don't really know exactly, because you don't know how the Spirit's working in someone. But just the voices that we heard praying to receive God, I estimated anywhere from 10 to 20 people throughout the whole trip, throughout different things, through VBS, street evangelism, whether it was little kids, teenage boys doing drugs in the street, right there, give their life to Christ. It was just amazing. So I don't know if some of you can read Spanish, but our shirts are from Luke 9. and the message is truth seekers, or seekers of the truth. And one of the first devotions that I did, just a personal devotion on the trip, I was just challenged to read through Psalms and just trying to seek God more. And the Psalms paint just a beautiful picture of just worshiping God and who He is and His character. And I was reading through Psalm chapter 9, and verse 9 and 10 really stuck out to me. It says, "The Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Those who know your name will trust in you, for you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you." And that goes along with our shirts, because we wanted one of our missions to be to seek God more. And I learned this early on the trip, especially when it says, you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. And one of the things that I wanted to share with the church today is just I felt this battle going on. I don't know about if anyone else was able to sense it, but it seemed like there was just a spiritual warfare going on throughout the whole trip. And whether it was our own doubts, whether it was a giant crater in the road on our way to the Haitian church, whether it was a truck breaking down, people losing things, there was always going to be an excuse to maybe not do the things that God had called us to do. And I think the enemy was just peeking his head in and just, it seemed like just the right time to mess things up. And even when we went to the Haitian church, Jim was told that he was going to be preaching there a couple hours before. So
Not even that. It was probably 10 minutes had the road been good.
Right.
Before.
And you saw the video of all of us 4 guys preaching. We were given maybe a few hours in advance. So we were forced to trust in God, and it was amazing. But there was always a distraction, a roadblock, something taken away from us. But the glorious thing is that God used that to accomplish His glorious purpose. And it was almost like a chess game with the enemy and God, whereas like Satan would do one move and say, "Here, take that," and then God would say, "No, I'm doing 2 more moves on you." And then his glorious purpose was fulfilled. And even when Jim and Jim broke down, that led the way for Zach and Austin to step out in faith. And had that never happened, it maybe would have led the way for them to preach. But it was awesome to see that every time that there was a little roadblock in the way, every single time that there was just a distraction, we remained faithful and we let the Holy Spirit work through us, and something amazing happened. In our second VBS, was maybe 30 kids in this one small, maybe a third of this church, this auditorium was the size of their church. And it was just one big room. We had all these kids sitting in pews. And in the midst of like all the kids doing crafts and kind of running around and being chaotic, I look over and Tanner's praying with some of them to receive Christ. So it's just like in the midst of chaos, in the midst of distractions, God is using us to fulfill His purpose. And I wanted to share that with you and challenge you all. One, to seek God, never stop. Never stop seeking God, but also just to be open to how He's going to work in your life. I was at the beginning of the trip. I was a little bit more, I think, closed off because of just how expensive it was for me to pay my way to go, and I was almost kind of doubting whether it was going to be worth it or not. And there's so many more stories that we could tell. So please come up and talk to us afterwards, and we'll tell you all the stories you want. But there's so many more stories. It's just amazing. But anyways, before the trip even started, I was kind of at a place of, I don't really know the right word for it, doubt maybe. Not trusting God enough, because if any of you know me, I'm kind of stingy with my money. I like to save. So I had to basically almost cut my bank account. I got some help from parents and family members, and some of you in the church helped me, and I appreciate it. But it almost ended up that I had to almost cut my bank account in half out of my own money to go. And I kind of had just a moment of honesty with God, and I said, God, I feel ashamed that I'm paying this, but I just pray that this trip will be worth the money that I spent. And he went above and beyond that call. And just worshiping today, I was just brought to tears today because, the lyrics that we sang earlier was, "You're worth it, God," just to know you more. And I realized that, at the end of this trip, I'll part with any amount of money just to know him more, just know him more deeply. So.
It's such a blessing to be a part of this group. I've been on missions trips before with teenagers, and you've always got somebody complaining, somebody really having a hard time, somebody not eating the food. But, this group of people, I'd never heard one complaint, never. And I know that there were times that they didn't feel good or they were tired, different things going on. But just, I think that, the Lord was able to really move because of the openness of our hearts and our willingness to learn and to grow. And there's nothing like sitting and worshiping at the International Church. They worship in 3 languages. So the worship was in English, Spanish, and Creole. So kind of alternate. And there's something just really powerful in the room. There was Brazilians, Dominicans, Haitians, and Americans. And there's something powerful about just being in a community of people, and we're worshiping in all those languages. And we serve a God that created the entire world and all peoples, and just it heightens your awareness of that, and it was just incredible. And yet at the same time, while I was sitting in church and Tara was back there, and the kids, some of them were back there with the kids, I just had this deep burden for our community. And I was just almost weeping over, it's almost, the culture down there is more spiritually awake. And so, we saw 2 people in our group accept the Lord when we were out on Friday night, and a whole group of guys. And we led kids to Christ, and they're just they may not understand walking with God. Many, many people down there don't understand that, and yet they're willing to have the conversations. They're more than willing to talk to you, but here it's like really hard ground. Talking to people about the Lord, it's like, it's just hard. It's like almost like a fight. And I just became really burdened sitting in church just for the hardness of our hearts here, but just for the brokenness, in our own communities. And so, it's just like what they were saying, we're ambassadors for Christ wherever we are. And it's, the Lord uses so many things when we step out and go to another culture. It's a place where we're not, with things we're not used to, and, lifestyles that are different. And he uses that in our lives so much, even a lost wallet. I had pulled something out of I had a purse hanging on me, just a small one, and I pulled something out for Courtney, a spray for her to use because her throat was hurting, and it was dark. We were sitting on the beach and it was dark, and evidently my little tiny wallet that I had right there so I could see it, so I knew right where it was, it slipped out and I didn't realize it. So my lost wallet enabled Zach and Austin to share in church, because Jim and Jim White had to go get my wallet. They had to drive 2 hours to get my wallet. The truck broke down on the way. So the Lord uses lost wallets. But it's just, it's just that whole principle that, in our weakness, he is strong. And for those who love him, he uses all things for the good of those who love him. And we just saw that over and over and over. And we all loved Island Time, didn't we? Nothing starts on time. Anyway, it was just a blessing.
You can hold on to that. Yeah, so I put some notes together. I'm just going to go through these really fast because we're getting close on our time. And, like Daniel said, there was There was an aura of spiritual warfare and just chaos almost every day. There was things going on in their church that never brought on to our team that most of us did not know about was going on in the background. A leader had to step down because of issues, sin in his life. And so there's all this stuff going on in the background. They were having problems with their money. They were having transactions. They were trying to get Jim to fly back to the States. Their money was all locked up. Somebody was trying to hack it. And so there's all this craziness going on. So our plans were kind of getting shifted around. The girls are sent out to the garden. And this garden is not like a garden here. They had a mule team come through and plow. And there's this huge chunks of hard dirt. And these poor girls are out there in this just super hot days trying to plant plants in an impossible situation, and never heard him complain. One time, the trip to go recover Cindy's wallet was an adventure in that we had to literally go up this mountain, really steep mountain, windy turns. I mean, you know, in the Dominican, when you drive, your average speed limit is anywhere between 60 and 70 miles an hour in maybe a block's distance. All right, so you're like whoop, and then stop and go over a bump or through a hole. You know, they don't have good drainage. They don't have sewers, and so it's a drainage ditch right in the middle of the road. And so you're constantly flying and then stopping. You know, you guys would be flipping people off every day if you live there. Because they just cut right in front of you. I mean, and there's hardly no accidents. They know that's just how you do it. And everybody just cuts in front of you, and everybody's merging and cutting and speeding, and lanes mean nothing. A 2-lane road becomes a 5-lane road. You pass whether there's a car coming at you or not. And there's times we're riding with Teresa in this 15-passenger van. It's like, oh man, we did it. I mean, it's like the accelerator and the brake. It's just constantly, it's what? Yeah, they say it's not close if the mirrors don't click. And I'm telling you, is so Jim and I went all the way up and over this crazy mountain, all right, steep mountain, winding road, all the way and up and down it. But before we got to the mountain, we heard something rattling, and we stopped and checked the oil and everything. And so we get all the other side of the mountain into the plains, and all of a sudden this truck just stopped running. So we tried putting it in 4-wheel drive. There was no transmission, so we just coasted off about 10 feet to the side, get out. The whole drive shaft is laying down on the ground. One end, the U joint came undone. That's what was rattling, and it's literally hanging down. Right behind the rear section is a propane tank, because they convert their gas to propane. Had we hit one of those crazy potholes, it would have jarred up into that propane tank, could have exploded, could have catapulted us. Regardless, God protected us and sent a local to help us get help. We spent like 4 hours driving around town, recovering her wallet, and dropping some woman off and going to a parts store. I mean, it was just crazy that this one little unique part to fit a Dodge Ram, 2005 Dodge Ram pickup truck in the middle of the country was nearly an impossible thing, and God provided that exact part that we needed. There may be 5 or 6 of those trucks on the entire island, okay? Most of them are foreign vehicles that are there, and that part was there, and God miraculously got us back just in time to hear Zach and Austin teach.
They said, we think they made that up.
But I just want to run through some bullet points. So Philippians 1, Paul starts off, and he just thanks God in remembering this church and their partnership in the gospel. And I was just thinking about you guys and just this partnership that we have, that we're all the way, down in the DR. You guys are here. God's still working. And it was just humbling just being a part of a church that's not even 3 years old and being able to take a team of these young adults to just really go and change the world, part of our mission statement. And it was just incredible just watching them. And then in verse 6, Philippians 1, verse 6, Paul says, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ." And I just want to put a bullet point, have it up on the screen, just for us, all of us to know, and just we really learned this on this trip, that God is doing a work in each of us in ways that we don't always recognize or anticipate. And God's going to complete what he started in us. And watching what God did in each one of these guys' lives that we did not know how God was going to use us. And I'm telling you, between Austin's hair, and these orphan kids that just needed someone to love on them. And we get to the shoe store, we were buying them each a pair of shoes, and we were partnered with somebody to go. And Austin unfortunately got this 13-year-old girl that was in love with him and his hair. And played with his hair, and she just lit up. And then there was a blind girl that was with us who was 17 years old, and Zach got partnered with the blind girl. Now, Zach's trying to figure out how God's going to use him, and so we're sitting there talking and trying to describe what Zach is like, and I said, and he's got muscles, and she says, I know.
This was before she ever even touched me.
And so when Zach escorted her to the store, she just lit up, It was just crazy watching this. And then we learned we were getting buying pizza for these kids, that Quiet Tara all of a sudden speaking Spanish. And we're like, well, where did you come from? And so that's why Cindy called her out to lead the Sunday morning Sunday school class, because she's connecting with these little...
I'm sitting there with Tara and these two little girls, and all of a sudden Tara starts speaking to them in Spanish, and I was like...
And
okay.
so when we get to this, Tanner and Daniel were sitting at a table there. This is like a Sam's Club. They've got this huge place like a Sam's Club down there. And Tanner and Daniel are sitting at this table with these two teenage boys, and we're trying to connect, talking sports and stuff. We get back to the orphanage. I had no idea that Daniel played basketball for 8 years, and this one kid, Alex, he was really good, as you saw in the video. He was really good at basketball. And next thing you know, Daniel and Tanner, are playing against this Alex, and who was the other kid's name? Brian, playing against these other two Dominican kids. And then Alex was like, I want you on my team. And so he just came alive, connecting with Daniel and his athleticism on the basketball court. The other guys, their athleticism wasn't quite up to par, but Alex enjoyed just creaming our guys in basketball. And then Cindy finds herself sitting doing speech therapy, using her skills that she didn't expect, there with a girl who had been abused. The girls were just loving on these other girls. And I wish I had a video. I have it on my phone. I'll show these girls were loving on. This one little girl was just as ornery as could be. And, she loved this little dog that ran around the property. She loved this little dog so much that she basically abused it. She pushed it around in a wheelchair, grabbed it by its legs. I got video of her grabbing its mouth and brushing its teeth violently. And then she picked it up and set it on a bucket and was determined to get its mouth open to rinse it out after she brushed its teeth. But just how God used every one of these guys and their uniqueness. And he's always working when we don't, anticipate it. And just watching Courtney and her shyness step out in faith and lead a devotion and lead us out in prayer. And the girls working in the garden, it was kind of with all the chaos going on in the background. I know they were a little disappointed because it didn't get planted well. And so Austin and I had to go basically, as he says, excavate the side of a mountain to get these huge chunks of dirt and smooth out the garden that they had planted. And that night that we led that woman to Christ, Tanner stopped and started speaking to that gal, that teenager, in Spanish. And just watching some of these guys bring out their Spanish was just incredible. Zach, one of the things he didn't share, we're out doing street evangelism, and all of a sudden he's just bold. And this woman that had an American doctor do a surgery for her. She was the only one to survive that surgery. She was like 20 people. She was the only one to survive that surgery. And Zach just boldly steps out and says, God just wants you to know that he has a purpose for you. And then he prayed for her through an interpreter. And it was just awesome to see that happen. And so in the midst of all this craziness, when I look at verse 12 and 13, and I'm just going to skim through this, Paul, as he writes this letter, is in chains. And he says, what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. And so going back to what Daniel said, in the midst of all the craziness and the warfare, all that was going on around us, God was still working and using every one of them to love on kids and lead them to Christ. And I just put a bullet point up here just so that God accomplishes his purposes even in the midst of our challenges. God is still working, just not losing sight that God is working in the midst of all that. And Paul's writing in chains. And then really I just want to skip down to verse 27. I shared this at the beginning of service. Paul says, whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Whether I come and see you or hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel and just living out your faith when whatever happens. And I'm telling you, watching this team, especially on the day we were going to the Haitian church, and I'm just going to kind of wrap up with this story because this was kind of a pinnacle of just a crazy day and experience for us. We had drove up to this mountain and spent the night at another ministry's house there. They had two big dormers. The girls were in one and we were in the other. And when we were leaving, the gal told us, because that night we dropped off our stuff, we were heading to this Haitian church, and she said, oh, it's just 20 minutes down the road, 20 minutes to a half hour down the road. And that 20 minutes ended up to be over 2 hours. And not because of her saying it was 20 minutes to a half hour, but it was easily an hour, not a half hour. It was over an hour to get there. And then once we got off there's a lot of really good paved roads there. They're really working hard to try to get off the third world country list. A lot of really good roads. But then we get off into the country, and the road is just like, we're in this 15-passenger van. There's a 4-wheel drive truck that Jim and a couple others are in. And we're in this, and literally this road that we go onto is just a gravel country road. And there's probably a 2-foot deep ditch on each side. And the road's maybe only 6.5 feet wide, just wide enough for the van and the truck to go down. And we get to this one spot, and it's pretty washed out. It's probably about 1.5 feet deep and probably 8 foot wide. And I don't know how we navigated that to get over that. I mean, it's like, the van's kind of rocking, and I don't know how many times we heard, this is a rental van. And that rental van was not the same when we returned it. I guarantee it. I guarantee it, due to these crazy roads. And then all of a sudden, the truck's in front of us. All of a sudden, we come to a complete stop. Now, you have to understand, it's pitch black outside. We can't see anything. There's no lights, no city lights. We are out in the country. There's a fence row next to us. There were some cattle over there, and it's pitch black. The only thing he sees are headlights. And all of a sudden, Teresa yells back to us in the van. She got word from Jim. The road is gone. It is gone. It is completely...
Oh no, there's no road.
There's no road. And so the way she worded it, in our minds, there is a cliff. There is a drop-off. And there is no way we're getting to the Haitian church, which, by the way, we are already over 2 hours late to. How late were we? We're hour and a half, about an hour and a half late to. We're already an hour and a half late to, all right? And so we all get out to go see, and we get there. There wasn't a cliff, fortunately, but the road was completely washed out. The water had washed out from that 2-foot ditch, and it literally was probably about 10 foot wide by maybe 3 foot deep. And there was no way, with a 4-wheel drive truck, there was no way. It was like a mini Grand Canyon. There's no way we could navigate it. So our only option now is to back up this narrow road in pitch black, all right? Now you have to understand, I find out just probably 10 minutes prior that I'm preaching that night, because I taught that morning, and I taught the one in the Proverbs series on the mouth, okay, with the mints that I gave away 2 weeks ago. All right, I taught that at Dominican Church. They loved that takeaway, and they said that really ministers to our culture, and it would really minister to the Dominicans. But they never told me that I was teaching that night. It would really minister to the Haitians. I didn't even have my notes with me. So I'm sitting in the back. I'm trying to flip through my Bible, trying to find those verses in Proverbs. And then I thought, well, Teresa's probably got internet on her phone. And so it's like, can we borrow your phone? So we hand it back. I hand it to Austin. He's trying to download our church app, because if we can download the church app, I've got the outline and I can go from there. But it's kind of like this. I have my Bible in my hand, and we're going over, I got my reading glasses on, and it's like, and I'm like, oh Lord, help me find that verse, and it's just bouncing like this. And then the app's downloading, and then Jim calls Teresa's phone, so we got to pass the phone back up. Well, it's like 10% downloaded, then it comes back, and then it's like we get it, it's like 50%. Then we got to hand it back up because the phone rings again, and it happened maybe 3 or 4 times, and then finally we got the app downloaded. I'm at peace, but then we come to a stop, and it was just complete crazy. We get out and we look at this, and then this team, I'm telling you, these guys are stellar. They came alive. We all get out with our smartphones, turn on our flashlights, and we made a runway for that van to back up in pitch black. And we probably had about a half a mile or more to back up, all right? Pitch black, bumpy, crazy road, and we're backing up, and we come to that first place where it's washed out, and I was just like, okay, stop. And I walked up to Teresa and said, there's no way we can back through this. But as I'm walking up the side of the van, I'm telling you, miraculously, there is one spot right there, was about 5-6 foot wide, where the ditch was filled in, where we could turn around. And we're backing the van up, okay? And as we're backing the van up, I'm giving her directions. I got my flashlight because there were some stumps. They're like, come on back. All of a sudden, these fire ants are biting my foot. I probably got 20 bites on my foot, and I got my sandal off, and I'm like, come on back, you're good. I'm like, come on back. And I'm sitting here hopping on one foot. I'm telling you, this night was crazy.
Wow, he's hopping on one foot.
Yeah, and while this is happening,
Teresa drives forward and gets stuck in the gully by the way.
yeah, she pulls forward and gets stuck, and the rear left wheel was a foot off the ground, off the road, all right? And while we're sitting there in this pitch black, we're trying to figure out how we're going to get there, all of a sudden this Haitian bus that, there's like, 20 Haitians on it. It's like this 4-wheel drive. We could just see it in the dark. They're like, blah, 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 and they're like, boom. On the other side of the fence, it's like, oh, we're supposed to be over there. We're over here. And they're cruising by, so we knew where we needed to get to. And so I'm telling you, this night just depicted the entire trip. We all jump in the van. It's like, Zach, no, you have to sit on our lap. All of us guys are, crammed in the back corner to where the van could go, and get that back wheel down to where we could get unstuck, find this bypass in this field, and follow that all the way to Haitian Church, which then Teresa locked the keys in the truck, which we had to get out afterwards.
Church was supposed to start at 6:30, which it never starts on time. So they started probably a little after 7, and we got there at like 8:40, and they were still worshiping.
And I just remember walking in that night thinking, if this was back here in the States, we'd have been gone. We'd have shut down church. We'd have never waited for it. Everybody had gone home. And just watching them patiently wait. And then, we're sitting there thinking, okay, let's get in here. I'm supposed to be teaching. Let's make this happen. And they were just so patient, taking their time. They had Teresa and this other gal that was with us go up and sing. And then had some announcements, and then had me come up and teach. And it was just an incredible evening. And it was in that night, it's like, Paul's writing in change, and it's like nothing will stop the purposes of God and the gospel being proclaimed. And that really depicted, I think, just the entire trip. There was all kinds of chaos, roadblocks, cars breaking down, whatever, and God's purposes prevailed, and we saw people come to faith in Christ, and it was just incredible. And these guys were just resilient through it all. So with that, I'm going to close us in prayer.